On May 31st of 1916, the British Grand Fleet and German High Seas Fleet both sailed out, expecting to reshape the balance of power in the North Sea. The British GF, with its might and resolve, sought to assert its dominance over the waves, while the German HSF, driven by a desire to challenge the status quo, aimed to finally prove its mettle. The outcome was hinged on firepower, tactics, technology, and training, encapsulating the fierce rivalry between the two empires. Their epic encounter was a defining moment, influencing naval doctrine and the course of the Great War. Welcome to our video on the Battle of Jutland, the largest naval engagement of the entire First World War. Do you know why thousands of people on YouTube and Patreon support us financially? Because they get history you won't find anywhere else. We release 3 new exclusive videos every week. Plus, they get perks like early access to all videos, voting rights on upcoming series and videos, access to our private Discord, our production schedule, and much more. Right now, 250 exclusive episodes are waiting for members and patrons, including from our series on the Eastern Front of World War II, Spanish War of Succession, the Punic Wars, the Pacific War, the Iberian Reconquista, the Russian Revolution and Civil War, the North African and Italian campaigns of World War II, Sicilian Wars between the Greeks and Carthaginians, and many others. By joining, you're not only unlocking rare content, you're also supporting the stories you love. Your help allows us to keep producing 3 free videos per week while paying our team competitive salaries and growing the channel. Join via the links in the description, the pinned comment, or by pressing the join button under the video. Thanks for making this possible. By 1916, naval technology was dominated by the Dreadnought-class warship, which both the British and German navies possessed. However, British warships featured larger caliber guns and rapid firing capabilities, while the Germans relied on advanced optics and rangefinding. The recent shift from coal to oil not only enhanced ship performance by extending operational ranges and improving layouts, but also reduced smoke, leading to better visibility. Turbine engines boosted speeds from 12 to 17 knots to 24 knots. Main naval gun sizes ranged from 11 to 15 inches. At the same time, innovations such as gyroscopes and centralized fire control systems increased accuracy, allowing effective firing ranges to expand from about 2,000 yards before 1900 to 10,000 yards by 1916. Just before the war, the battlecruiser emerged, combining the firepower of dreadnoughts with reduced armor for increased speed. British battlecruisers typically had 12 to 13.5-inch guns, while their German counterparts featured 11 to 12-inch guns with slightly more armor. Primarily used for scouting, battlecruisers operated independently from their fleet formations. The advent of torpedo boats prompted the development of destroyers for defense, but submarines emerged as the primary threat, effectively targeting unprotected merchant ships with deck guns and torpedoes. Communication technology advanced through radio telegraph systems on naval vessels, although their use on merchant ships was limited. By the war's conclusion, sonar technology was still in its infancy, and aircraft were primarily focused on reconnaissance. Mines played a critical role in naval warfare, with approximately 190,000 laid in strategic areas, significantly impacting naval operations and engagements. In short, both belligerent nations' naval technology had been rapidly improving since the beginning of the 20th century, making their eventual clash inevitably more bloody. At the outset of World War I, the German HSF possessed only 16 dreadnoughts, compared to the British GF's 28, leaving them with little chance of winning a decisive naval battle. Vice Admiral Hugo von Pohl agreed with Admirals Georg von Müller and Friedrich von Ingenohl that the naval theatre of the Great War would have to be short and decisive to preserve their fleet. Instead of engaging in direct combat with their numerically superior adversary, they adopted a divide-and-conquer strategy, launching raids in the North Sea and bombarding the English coast to lure out smaller British squadrons and pickets for destruction by surface ships or U-boats. The primary theatre for surface action between Britain and Germany was the North Sea. There, along the northern coast of Europe, the GF outnumbered the HSF, allowing Britain to maintain a naval blockade that cut Germany off from overseas trade and resources. Germany kept a fleet in being, housing its warships behind a mine screen and occasionally launching sorties in attempts to lure the British into fleet engagements, as seen during the Lowestoft raid. To counter Britain's blockade, Germany implemented its own naval blockade against Britain in 1915, using unrestricted submarine warfare against merchant shipping to choke off supplies to the island nation. However, this resulted in the sinking of numerous neutral ships, provoking significant protests from those countries. On April 25, 1916, the German Admiralty reluctantly suspended unrestricted submarine warfare and reverted to cruiser rules. Before the Great War, international communication relied on undersea cables, which were primarily controlled by Britain. Shortly after the war was declared, Britain severed German cables, forcing Germany to depend on wireless communication with ciphers. On August 11, 1914, the German-Australian steamer Hobart was seized in Melbourne, Australia. Found aboard the Hobart's decks was the Handelswerkesbuch codebook, which was handed over to Room 40, the cryptanalysis section of the British Admiralty. On the 26th, the Royal Navy captured the SMS Magdeburg, which had run aground in the Baltic Sea with the signal book Der Kaiserlichen Marine on board. With both codebooks, Room 40 successfully decrypted German naval codes. German ships reported their positions nightly via wireless, enabling the British to track them and adjust patrols more effectively. However, due to liaison issues, critical information from Room 40 often reached the Admiralty late, incomplete, or misinterpreted when German ships sailed. At the start of the war, First Lord of the Admiralty Winston Churchill appointed John Jellicoe as the full admiral and commander of the GF based at Scapa Flow. To maintain the naval blockade of Germany, the Royal Navy established several forces, including the Northern Patrol Force, Dover Patrol Force, Auxiliary Patrol, and a submarine flotilla in the Baltic. Various naval groups operated from Scapa Flow, Cromarty, Rosyth and Harwich, patrolling for Germans attempting to breach the blockade. The principle of concentration of force was essential for fleet tactics of the era. Fleets engaged in compact formations of parallel columns, which enhanced maneuverability and reduced sightlines, aiding communication with flags and signal lamps. A fleet in short columns could change direction swiftly, compared to one in a long line. The flagship, positioned at the front of the center column, ensured visibility of commands to the formation. However, reliance on wireless telegraphy posed security and equipment limitations, complicating communication. Signals from the flagship needed time to reach all vessels, requiring each ship to acknowledge and relay commands, which slowed movements in large formations. Parallel formations improved visibility and interpretation of orders, while heavier ships would reform into a single line before battle to accurately face the enemy. Scouting forces, primarily consisting of battlecruisers, were crucial for gathering intelligence on enemy fleets, aiming to position the battle line to intersect the enemy's path, a tactic known as crossing the T. On December 16, 1914, the Germans launched a raid on Scarborough, Hartlepool and Whitby, using the 1st Scouting Group under Admiral Franz Hipper, resulting in 108 deaths and 525 civilian injuries. Room 40 provided advance warning of the raid, but the Admiralty allowed it to proceed with the aim of dispatching a force to ambush the German ships on their return to Germany. Jellicoe ordered several British squadrons to hunt German raiders, coordinating an ambush at Dogger Bank. On December 15th, British Admirals David Beatty and George Warrender met near Moray Firth, but subsequent skirmishes led the Germans to withdraw, missing a chance to engage. Hipper suspected British foreknowledge of his advance due to trawler spying. On January 23rd, intercepted German messages indicated a new sortie, prompting a British response. An engagement the following day saw British battlecruisers outpace the German fleet. Despite early advantages, Hipper retreated, leaving the disabled Blucher, which eventually sank after sustaining multiple hits and attacks from British light cruisers. The Germans mistakenly believed the British had received advanced warning, and attributed this to a spy in Yada Bay. Once again, the British had failed to capitalize on an opportunity for a decisive victory. After the inconclusive Battle of Dogger Bank, the British established the Battlecruiser Fleet, or BCF, under Admiral Beatty, operating from Rosyth and functioning as the Royal Navy's advance guard. The BCF, which was part of the GF, consisted of 3 battlecruiser squadrons, 3 light cruiser squadrons, 2 destroyer flotillas, and the new 5th Battle Squadron. Its primary mission was to engage the enemy if they were of equal or inferior strength, and to lure them into a decisive battle with the GF while avoiding stronger forces. Throughout 1915, the GF conducted regular sweeps in the North Sea, while the HSF made only limited sorties, remaining close to Heligoland. On January 18, 1916, German Vice Admiral Reinhard Scheer replaced the HSF's commander and proposed a bold strategy to achieve a balance of power essential for victory. Scheer's plan focused on targeting British trade convoys bound for Norway, anticipating that the British would respond with overwhelming force. He believed Beatty's BCF would engage first, allowing him to destroy Beatty's forces before the GF could intervene. This strategy gained the Kaiser's approval, leading to intensified German operations, including U-boat attacks and Zeppelin raids. Scheer's campaign began on February 10th with destroyer sweeps and scouting actions. The British countered with air raids, but initial engagements failed to elicit direct combat. Additionally, the British fleet faced logistical challenges due to their dispersed bases, complicating their defences against German raids. Admiral Beatty advocated for the transfer of fast battleships to the BCF to enhance its striking capability, but Admiral Jellicoe opposed the move to avoid encouraging reckless independent actions by Beatty. By April, British naval leadership concluded that a decisive engagement with the Germans was unlikely due to the GF's location. They urged a relocation of the fleet closer to Rosyth and the Humber. Subsequently, the Admiralty ordered the transfer of several squadrons to Rosyth, designating it as the main base for both battleships and battlecruisers by May 12th. Meanwhile, Jellicoe planned an operation for June 2nd, designed to draw out the HSF, with a light cruiser force executing an incursion into the Skagerrak, supported by battleships positioned strategically. Jellicoe's plans for June 2nd were interrupted by a German raid on Lowestoft that commenced on May 31st. As Scheer advanced toward Lowestoft, he received news that unrestricted naval warfare was being suspended, prompting a shift in his operational strategy. These changes required Hipper's forces to bombard Sunderland, while coordinating with the HSF. On May 30th, Scheer ordered the fleet to assemble on the outer roads by 1900. At 1736, a coded message was broadcast, signalling that the Skagerrak operation would initiate on May 31st. By 11:53 the next day, the Germans were sailing towards Skagerrak. By 2200 on May 28th, Room 40 intercepted Scheer's orders to ready the HSF for operations. With this intelligence, the British Admiralty informed Jellicoe of Scheer's course and instructed him to take the GF towards Skagerrak. Jellicoe subsequently informed Beatty of a rendezvous point for their fleets set at 1400 May 31st, estimating that Beatty would be 69 miles away from his fleet and would require 90 minutes to fall back to the battle fleet if he encountered a superior enemy force while scouting. By 500 on May 31st, the British were heading towards their rendezvous point for 1400. The British GF was dominated by Jellicoe's Dreadnought battle fleet, which consisted of 24 battleships and 3 battlecruisers, 8 armoured cruisers, 8 light cruisers, 4 scout cruisers, 51 destroyers, and 1 destroyer minelayer. The battleships were organised into 3 squadrons of 8 ships, further divided into divisions of 4. They were arranged in line ahead, with columns 8 cables apart, giving Jellicoe 2 advantages. 3 of the 4 strongest divisions led the line, and the flagship was positioned about 1/3 of the way along, allowing the Commander-in-Chief to see more of the action in the van and directly lead 2/3 of the line. British reconnaissance was undertaken by the BCF group, consisting of 6 battlecruisers, 4 fast battleships, 14 light cruisers, and 27 destroyers. Air support was provided by the seaplane tender HMS Engadine. On the other side, the German HSF was divided into a main battle force and a separate reconnaissance unit. Scheer's primary battle fleet consisted of 16 battleships, 6 pre-dreadnought battleships, 6 light cruisers, and 31 torpedo boats, arranged in a cruising formation. His line was held by the 5th and 6th Divisions, followed by his flagship, after which came the 1st and 2nd Divisions, with the rear held by the 2nd Battle Squadron. This formation meant Jellicoe's battle line had superiority in numbers, heavy guns, and higher speed by 3 knots. Jellicoe's 24 dreadnoughts had a combined broadside weight of 332,360 pounds, versus Scheer's 134,216 pounds. German ships generally had stronger protection against shellfire and underwater attacks, especially when comparing their battlecruisers. For the British, victory depended on quickly bringing their superior firepower to bear, preferably at longer ranges that favoured their heavier guns. The German battle fleet was hindered by the slow speed and limited armament of their 6 pre-dreadnoughts in the 2nd Squadron, capping the maximum fleet speed at 18 knots, compared to the British fleet's 21 knots. Hipper's first scouting group had all 5 of Germany's available battlecruisers at its disposal, and led the HSF advance in line ahead some 50 miles. Beatty held a 2-to-1 superiority over Hipper, and had 3.5 times Hipper's weight of fire. Nearly all warships on either side were equipped with torpedoes of various sizes. British battleships typically possessed 3 to 4 underwater torpedo tubes, and battlecruisers 2 to 5. German battleships were armed with 5 to 6 underwater torpedo tubes, while their battlecruisers were armed with 4 to 5. For both fleets, light cruisers were distributed between the scouting forces and the main battle fleets, most organized into squadrons. Hipper enjoyed a 30 to 27 superiority in destroyers, and his B-97 class was larger than any British counterparts. Hipper's destroyers also had twice as many torpedo tubes. At 3:40 on May 31st, the BCF sailed through a patrol sector where U-32 spotted HMS Galatea and Phaeton leaving the 4th. U-32 fired 2 torpedoes, revealing its location before crash diving. At 4:10, it sighted the 2 BCS heading southeast and reported the sightings. By 500, U-66 spotted the 2 BS coming from Moray Firth, and at 6:35 reported 8 battleships and cruisers heading north. Both reports were inaccurate due to the British zigzag maneuvers, but they created the impression that the British fleet was split into 2 groups, exactly what the Germans sought. That morning, Captain Thomas Jackson, director of the Operations Division, entered room 40 and asked about the British Directional Station's placement of DK, the call sign of Scheer's flagship. After the HSF departed harbour, they observed almost total wireless silence. During the morning, room 40 had received no signals indicating the enemy was at sea, only messages about preparations for Zeppelin reconnaissance. Thus, they responded that DK was still in Wilhelmshaven. Without further inquiry, Jackson left to inform the fleet. However, he failed to realise that DK was only Scheer's harbour call sign. When the German fleet put out to sea, the commander-in-chief assumed a different call sign, transferring the normal one to the wireless telegraphy station at Wilhelmshaven to conceal that the fleet was at sea. When Jackson left room 40, they assumed he understood this, setting the stage for a fateful mistake. At 14:10 on May 31st, Galatea reported sighting a 2-funnelled steamer 8 miles to the southeast. Drawing closer, she reported at 14:20 that 2 enemy cruisers were investigating the steamer. Beatty ordered a turn southeast towards Horn Reef, aiming to position his force between the enemy and his base. This turn caused the battlecruisers to emit dense clouds of coal smoke, obscuring signals, and resulting in the 5 BS seeing the signal 7 minutes late, becoming separated by over 5 miles from Beatty. Upon receiving the first reports of enemy vessels, Hipper turned his battlecruisers southwest at 14:27. Galatea opened fire at 14:34, causing them to dash north. The Galatea and Elbing then duelled. The Elbing scored a hit, but the shell failed to burst. At 14:51, the Galatea reported 7 large vessels northeast, while at 15:12, the Elbing reported 4 modern enemy cruisers 18,000 yards west, with another 2 just coming into view. Shortly after, the Frankfurt and Pillau opened fire from 16,000 yards, forcing their target to turn out of range. By 15:22, the Galatea signalled that she was leading the enemy northeast. At 15:32, Beatty changed course, but his flag signals could not be seen from Barham. To complicate matters, Evan Thomas had not been briefed on the standing orders with the BCF. This was because the 5 BS typically operated with the GF, whose ships were expected to obey orders precisely. At the same time, Beatty's standing instructions allowed his commanders to use their initiative while keeping station with his flagship. Consequently, Evan Thomas's 4 Queen Elizabeth-class battleships ended up 10 miles behind, denying Beatty the opportunity to concentrate his forces. Hipper prevented Beatty from cutting across his line of retreat by turning southeast, luring Beatty towards the HSF. At 15:48, the Lützow opened fire, followed immediately by her consorts. The Lion and Princess Royal replied, concentrating on the Lützow, while the Tiger and New Zealand opened fire on Moltke, with the Queen Mary joining 2 minutes later. The Derfflinger was unmolested and began firing on the Princess Royal. The westward wind blew the British funnel and gunsmoke over them, as the eastern sky masked the grey German ships, while the British vessels were silhouetted against a bright, clear western horizon. By 15:52, both Lion and Tiger had been hit twice, and by 15:59, Princess Royal suffered 2 hits, putting her Argo Tower out of action and disrupting her ability to fire. Queen Mary landed the first British hits on Seydlitz at 15:55 and 15:57, damaging her barbette and igniting 2 fore and 2 main charges in the working chamber. By 1600, the Tiger took another 6 hits from the Moltke against her Q and X turrets, disrupting her ability to fire. Both ships landed additional hits on each other between 1600 and 1604. At 1600, both sides' flagships found each other's range. The Lützow was hit twice on her forecastle, while Lion took a hit to her Q turret that burst and entered the gunhouse, killing or wounding everyone there and blowing off the front roof plate. Despite being severely burned, Major Francis Harvey led the crew in flooding the magazines, thereby preventing a potential explosion. The Lion received 3 more hits by 1604, but remained in no immediate danger. At the rear, the Von de Tann began hitting Indefatigable at 1602, first knocking out her A turret and then detonating her X magazine, ripping the ship apart, causing her to sink rapidly, alongside 1,071 officers and men, with only 2 survivors. BT's line fell into disarray, with the enemy managing 22 hits to his meager 6. Hipper turned his ships southeast at 1604, converging on the BCF, while also bringing his battlecruisers within range of the 15-inch guns of the 5BS for the first time. The leading battleships began firing on Frankfurt, Elbing and Pilau. Evan Thomas then ordered his ships to concentrate in pairs on the 2 rear German ships, Moltke and Von de Tann, who soon came under a hail of 15-inch shells. Von de Tann was hit immediately near her stern, and by 1616, Moltke took 2 hits. At 1612, Lion boldly altered course southeast, closing in on Lützow, closely followed by Princess Royal. At 1615, the Lützow was hit twice, and the Seydlitz once by the Queen Mary at 1617. With his ships being fired upon by both the BCF and the 5th Battle Squadron, Hipper again ordered his ships to follow in his wake, forming line ahead south to evade the 5th Battle Squadron. During this maneuver, both Seydlitz and Dörflinger concentrated fire on Queen Mary. At 1623, the Moltke took another 2 15-inch hits, and the Lion received 2 hits from the Lützow a minute later. None of this eased the pressure on Queen Mary, which was suddenly hit by a combined salvo from the Seydlitz and Dörflinger at 1625. One shell struck her quarterdeck, then exploded over her fore-turret and amidships, resulting in a catastrophic explosion that broke her in half near the foremast. The Queen Mary sank, taking 1,270 men with her. 18 of her officers and men would later be rescued by British destroyers Laurel and Petard, as well as Germany's V-28. After witnessing Queen Mary blow up, BT famously remarked to his flag captain Chatfield, "There seems to be something wrong with our bloody ships today," before ordering a turn of 2 points to starboard. Shortly after 1625, Princess Royal took at least 1 hit from Dörflinger, while landing 3 hits on Von de Tann. After narrowly avoiding the wreckage of Queen Mary, Tiger changed her target to Seydlitz, and was in turn fired upon by both Seydlitz and Moltke. As Tiger drew closer, she received 3 hits. At 1600, BT ordered Captain Barry Bingham and the 2nd Division to launch a destroyer torpedo attack, while Hipper ordered Captain Paul Heinrich on the Regensburg to lead the 9TF to do the same. The action began at 1615, as destroyers opened fire on each other and torpedoed the larger enemy ships. The V-27 and the Nomad were the first to be crippled by gunfire, with the V-26 later scuttling the V-27 after rescuing her crew. Between 1627 and 1636, the Germans fired 10 torpedoes, but all missed. The Nestor received 2 hits to her boilers from Regensburg, bringing her to a halt. At 1640, the Petard landed a torpedo hit on the V-29, sinking her quickly. Upon sighting the HSF, the Morsum fired 2 torpedoes at its van, but to no effect, and soon after took a hit to her oil tanks. At 1657, Seydlitz suffered a torpedo hit to her starboard side, developing a list. The Nomad was then fired upon by the Thüringen and the Posen, forcing her to abandon ship, as Nestor came under fire and was also compelled to abandon ship. The BCF pursued Hipper eastward, and the Germans landed 42 hits against 11 by the British between 348 and 454. At 4:30, the Southampton mistakenly reported an enemy cruiser to the southeast, which was actually the HSF's arrival. The 2 LCS advanced towards the enemy until they confirmed the 4 funnel profiles of at least 6 German battleships. At 500, the Germans opened fire as the light cruisers zigzagged. BT signalled a northwest turn towards Jellicoe, but the 5BS was 18 miles astern and did not receive the signal in time, delaying them by 5 minutes and allowing the BCF to pass by while still engaging the Germans. During this time, the Seydlitz and Barham were hit. At 4:45, Evan Thomas ordered his ships to form a line, and by 4:48 he acknowledged the signal as the BCF passed. However, BT's flag lieutenant delayed executing the signal, prolonging Evan Thomas's compliance. At 4:55, Evan Thomas moved within range of the enemy battleships, signaling his squadron to follow. The 5 BS turned in succession and became vulnerable to concentrated fire. The Barham sustained 2 hits between 5:56 and 5:01, disabling her main wireless. From 4:59 to 5:02, the Lion took 3 hits, damaging her sickbay. Consequently, her crews prematurely flooded her X-magazine. The Tiger was also hit, damaging her aft funnel and A-turret's right gun. The Grosser Kurfürst was hit at 5:09 and the Markgraf at 5:10, causing minor flooding. The Seydlitz and Lützow were struck thrice by 5:25, damaging their communications, and Döflinger was hit at 5:19, igniting fires. After Evan Thomas turned away, the German battleships concentrated on the Warspite and Malaya, with the Malaya sustaining hits at 5:20 and 5:27, disabling her X-turret. By 5:37, she had taken 3 more hits below the waterline, causing flooding and a starboard list. The Warspite suffered 7 hits in total. British light cruisers and destroyers retaliated by launching torpedoes at distances of up to 18,000 yards, but were unsuccessful in striking their targets. Meanwhile, Jellicoe received wireless updates about enemy positions and Evan Thomas's engagement. Earlier, he had dispatched Rear Admiral Horace Hood's 3BS to support BT, while Rear Admiral Arbuthnot's 1CS patrolled his van. At 5:38, the Chester encountered the German van, led by Rear Admiral Boedicke. Upon being spotted by the Germans, the Frankfurt, Elbing and Wiesbaden opened fire. The Chester took several hits, disabling her No. 1 gun and killing or wounding the crews of her No. 2 and No. 3 guns. She immediately turned northeast, zigzagging at full speed. At 5:40, she passed the Invincible, which opened fire at 5:50 on a surprise Boedicke. The Invincible was soon joined by the Inflexible and Indomitable, as the Frankfurt and Elbing launched torpedoes at them. The Pilau sustained a hit that disabled 4 of her 8 boilers. Soon after, the Wiesbaden was hit by a 12-inch shell in her engine room, bringing her to a complete stop, and rendering her a target for passing British ships. By 600, Boedicke could see the dim outlines of the newly arrived enemy and informed Scheer and Hipper at 6:14. As Hood engaged the enemy, Commander Loftus-Jones led 4 destroyers in Shark to commence a torpedo attack on Hipper. The German torpedo boats launched their own salvos as duels broke out. By 6:10, the Shark was forced to turn away after sustaining too much damage from the Regensburg. As she turned, the G-41 hit her with a torpedo from 1,500 yards, striking near her aft funnel and sinking her rapidly. Only 7 of her crew were rescued by the Danish steamer Vidar at 1000. The Acasta took 2 hits to her engine room from Frankfurt, losing her steering. As the second scouting group disappeared south, torpedo wakes from all 3 of their cruisers appeared, but the British battlecruisers avoided them all. Hipper turned east by 5:55, convinced his position was untenable and that he must fall back on the HSF. At 600, Jellicoe's advanced forces encountered BT's leading ships, forming a shrinking wedge-shaped area between the 2 fleets known as the Windy Corner. Jellicoe had limited information about enemy positions as he tried to organize his battleships into a battle line. He recognized that moving west would bring him closer to Scheer, but risked vulnerability if the Germans arrived early. Conversely, heading east would distance him from Scheer, but offered a strategic advantage by potentially crossing his T and enhancing visibility against the western horizon. Ultimately, by 6:15, Jellicoe chose to deploy east. As BT's 4 remaining battlecruisers joined Hood's forces at 5:47, Arbuthnot engaged the enemy. By 5:53, the Warrior, the Defence and the Duke of Edinburgh were firing on the disabled Wiesbaden. However, Arbuthnot failed to notice enemy shells targeting him, as both Hipper and Scheer's ships opened fire at 6:07. In the ensuing panic, the Warrior crossed in front of the Lion, forcing a sharp turn. Unfortunately, the Defence was struck twice at 6:20, causing a catastrophic explosion that sank her and killed all 903 crew members. Amid the chaos, the Warspite, damaged and attempting to evade, turned starboard towards the enemy line, enduring fire from 5 German battleships from 620 to 624, taking 11 hits before managing to retreat north. Warrior sustained 15 hits, and despite significant engine damage and losing 71 crew members, ultimately sank by 8:25 on June 1st, although her crew was rescued by the Engadine. Rapid fire was initiated at 6:19, with the Lion scoring 2 hits on Lützow. By 6:22, Princess Royal was struck twice on her X-turret. The Indomitable hit Döflinger 3 times and Seydlitz once, while Lützow suffered 10 hits from the Lion, Inflexible and Invincible, including 2 hits below the waterline. Then at 6:34, Invincible was hit on her Q turret, causing a devastating internal explosion that ignited her Q and adjacent P magazines. Within 15 seconds, the ship split in half and sank, resulting in the deaths of all but 6 of her 1,032 crew members, including Rear Admiral Hood. The Lützow was now on fire and listing forward, and was thus left adrift and unable to communicate. Hipper had to transfer his flag to the G39, seeking refuge on another battlecruiser. At 6:30, Jellicoe's battle fleet crossed Scheer's T and began firing, catching them off guard as they emerged from the smoke and clouds. The Iron Duke launched 4 salvos at intervals of 35 to 50 seconds, then switched to rapid fire every 23 seconds, inflicting 7 hits on the König. A hit to her conning tower injured Rear Admiral Benker. At the same time, the König's propellant fires ignited, and her lower armor belt was breached, narrowly avoiding a catastrophic explosion due to seawater flooding. 10 of the 24 British dreadnoughts opened fire, inflicting a direct hit on the Markgraf that bent her propeller shaft. Recognizing his peril, Scheer ordered a Gefechtsverwendung, or action turned together by 16 points. This maneuver was risky. Turning too early could reduce the distance between the ships and lead to collisions. However, by 6:45 it had been executed perfectly. In response, Commodore Michelson aboard the Rostock led the 3TF to launch a torpedo attack and deploy smoke screens. The British lost sight of the Germans at 6:40, prompting Jellicoe to order a decisive turn south at 6:55. At 6:54, Marlborough was struck by a torpedo to her starboard side, beneath the forebridge, flooding her engine and hydraulic rooms. Despite developing a gradual starboard list, she managed to maintain 15.8 knots. Feeling compelled to seek contact once more, at 6:55, Scheer ordered another Gefechtsverwendung swinging east in hopes of surprising the enemy, as torpedo boats attempted to rescue the crew of Wiesbaden. At 7:11, the German rescue parties came under fire from the Iron Duke, Royal Oak, Benbow, Bellerophon, Colossus and Neptune, forcing them to abandon the rescue effort. Simultaneously, the Shark bravely engaged 4 German torpedo boats, successfully disabling the V-48 with gunfire. However, she was struck and sunk by a torpedo from the S-54 at 7:02. When Southampton attempted to deliver the coup de grace against Wiesbaden, German battleships began unleashing a barrage of shells, prompting the 2 LCS to withdraw by 7:04. By 7:06, the entire British battle line turned starboard to close the range and engage the enemy. By 7:15, Jellicoe had crossed Scheer's T again, this time with a tighter formation. At 7:13, Scheer ordered his 4 remaining battlecruisers to charge what he believed was the enemy's van. However, he realized to his horror that they were heading into the British centre, and quickly commanded them to turn away. Scheer then ordered a 3rd Gefechtsverwendung to starboard, this time under the full weight of enemy broadsides. At 7:20, the Lützow attempted to withdraw after taking 2 hits that disabled her A and B turrets and severed power cables to her D turret. Between 7:14 and 7:20, the Döflinger sustained 14 hits, destroying her D turret and igniting charges that spread to the magazine, leading to further explosions. This extensive damage wrecked her No. 3 port casement, blew off her chart house and struck her conning tower. She turned away, vanishing under a smokescreen laid by friendly torpedo boats. Beginning at 7:30, the Seydlitz received 5 hits to her port wing turret, as the Von der Tann was hit in her port quarter. Other severely damaged battleships included the König, which was hit below her port aftermost casement, the Große Kurfürst, which absorbed 7 hits which led to flooding, the Markgraf, the Kaiser and the Helgoland, which had had a significant hole blown in her forward side armour. From 1905 to 1930, the Germans endured 37 heavy hits, while inflicting only 2 in return, with Derfflinger suffering 14 of those hits in what became known as the Death Ride. At 7:23, Scheer ordered his covering torpedo boats to initiate a torpedo attack. The torpedo boats approached within 7,700 yards of the enemy, with the G-86 and V-28 taking hits while firing 32 torpedoes at the British line. As they retreated, the S-35 was struck amidships by a large shell from the Iron Duke, breaking her in two. Shortly after, the S-51 was also hit. Naval doctrine for facing a mass torpedo attack typically advised either turning into the wakes or turning away from them. Turning into the wakes would allow Jellicoe to continue engaging the enemy while daylight remained, but also increased the risk of hits. Conversely, turning away would significantly reduce the likelihood of being struck, but it would also cost valuable daylight. Jellicoe ordered his ships away from their wakes and successfully dodged all torpedoes, some narrowly. Later, many criticized Jellicoe's decision, yet it adhered to naval doctrine and aligned with the British strategy of preserving their capital ships. Having lost sight of the Germans, Jellicoe relied on Beatty to locate them. By 8:18, the 3 LCS encountered 5 light cruisers from the 4SG, prompting both squadrons to open fire from 6,000 yards. They landed a direct hit on the München, which took 2 6-inch shells that damaged her boilers. At 8:19, the British battlecruisers found the first scouting group, with the Lion and Princess Royal firing upon the German battlecruisers, all of which were heavily disabled except for the Moltke. In the poor visibility, the Derfflinger was hit once on her A-barbette, while the Seydlitz sustained 5 hits. The Schlesien took a minor hit, while the Schleswig-Holstein was struck in her casements, and the Pommern absorbed a heavy shell hit. The British did not escape from this engagement scot-free, as a 5.9-inch shell hit the Lion, and the Princess Royal sustained a heavy shell that passed through her foremast and forefunnel without detonating. By 900, Jellicoe had decided to continue south without engaging the Germans until dawn, fearing that pursuing them in the dark would compromise his numerical superiority. He was right to be concerned about a night battle against Scheer, due to several critical factors. German capital ships had thicker armour and heavier secondary batteries, while the British relied on longer-range guns, allowing the Germans to close the distance quickly and pose a significant threat of torpedo attacks. Additionally, the British were untrained for night operations, whereas the Germans had extensive experience in this area. The Germans excelled in searchlight control, utilizing techniques that illuminated enemy vessels without revealing their positions, and they employed colored lights for recognition signals, a method the British struggled to replicate effectively. These advantages significantly heightened the risks for the British fleet in a potential nighttime confrontation. Although he lacked precise information about Scheer's position and course, Jellicoe knew that Scheer was heading southwest to escape back to port, and felt confident that his fleet lay between the enemy and their base. Scheer had 4 potential escape routes, all of which were known to Jellicoe. Scheer could turn away from the British fleet and head through the Skagerrak Channel into the Baltic, but this longer route risked stranding damaged ships at sea. The German admiral could go through the risky central gap in the minefield before heading 100 miles southeast through the Horn Reef, or take the longer route, 180 miles around the minefields, through the East Frisian route. All of these routes would inevitably take him to Yade. Based on the last daylight reports, Scheer was heading southwest, leaving Jellicoe to assume he was taking the North Frisian path. However, Scheer ultimately opted for the Horn Reef path, believing the British would send more warships for a pincer attack. Jellicoe redeployed his battleships into a close night cruising formation, positioning the battlecruisers southwest to intercept any Germans moving south, while stationing destroyers behind the main fleet to engage ships heading north. By 9:17, the British were in their night formation, with battleships in columns of 4 a mile apart to minimize surprise torpedo attacks. Beatty's battlecruisers were stationed 15 miles southwest of Iron Duke, positioned to intercept the Germans. Smaller ships were used for screening and scouting, with destroyer flotillas stationed 5 miles behind to guard against torpedo boats. Jellicoe ordered the minelayer Abdiel to lay mines off Horn Reef as a precaution. Meanwhile, Scheer's fleet formed a single column line ahead, with slow-moving pre-dreadnoughts sent to the rear. By 9:15, Hipper boarded Moltke and reassumed command. 2 fateful issues with Room 40 intelligence would unfold throughout the night. The first issue arose from Jellicoe's distrust of the intelligence, stemming from the day's previous debacles, which led him to favor the reports of his scouts. The second issue came from the fact that despite receiving numerous Room 40 intelligence reports throughout the night, specific intercepted signals indicated Scheer's position or course were omitted until 3:29. Critically, Scheer had ordered a Zeppelin reconnaissance over the Horn's Reef at dawn, but this information was omitted from an Admiralty signal to Jellicoe. Subsequently, at least 6 more signals hinting at Scheer's course towards the Horn's Reef were all omitted in reports to Jellicoe. The first 2 indicated Scheer was about to cross Jellicoe's wake. The third conclusively indicated Scheer was assembling flotillas off Horn's Reef at 2 AM, and the latter hinted that Scheer was heading for Horn's Reef. It was a mystery as to why this was omitted from the signals sent to Jellicoe. The most logical explanation is that the Admiralty feared that if the Germans intercepted such information being sent to Jellicoe, they would finally figure out their codes had been compromised. At 9:38, BT reported the Germans heading southwest, followed later by similar reports from vessels like the Southampton and Nottingham, persuading Jellicoe that the enemy was moving southwest. Meanwhile, Scheer intercepted British wireless traffic, which revealed the disposition of their fleet, giving him confidence he could avoid their capital ships. To identify ships in the dark, the British relied on a challenge and response flashing code system. A British ship would flash a code, and if the other vessel did not respond correctly, it would open fire. This system was insecure, as nearby German ships could memorize the codes. At 9:32, the Lion breached signal security by asking Princess Royal for the challenge and reply, a leak in signals that would benefit the Germans. Early in the night, the ships of the 4th Half Flotilla and the Seydlitz learned the recognition code. Although the battlecruisers misidentified one part as Joe, Elbing argued it was U and Frankfurt correctly determined it was UA. Throughout the night, the Germans would flash partially correct codes, causing hesitation among the British. By 9:30, German forces attacked the British rear, leading to several night encounters. At 9:45, Castor and the 11th Flotilla were spotted by Frankfurt and Pillau, who fired and missed with their torpedoes. At 9:50, the 4th Battle Squadron mistook the 4th Destroyer Flotilla for friends, and failed to respond to a signal, resulting in another missed torpedo attack by the Germans. At 10:05, Castor, Marne and the 11 DF engaged 3 German light cruisers. The Germans' partially correct signals caused hesitation among the British. The Hamburg and Elbing opened fire from 2,500 yards, damaging the Castor and Marne. The Castor, Marne and Magic fired torpedoes, but none hit, leading to a disengagement after 5 minutes. While the Hamburg and Elbing engaged the British, the Frauenlob and Stuttgart faced intense fire from the Southampton, Dublin, Nottingham and Birmingham. The Southampton took 20 hits, and the Dublin received 18, leading to heavy casualties. The Stettin was also hit while attempting to lure out the British. As more ships joined, the Hamburg and Elbing incurred casualties. The duels continued until 10:21, when the Southampton fired a torpedo, prompting disengagement. As the chaotic engagement ensued, a torpedo struck Frauenlob, causing her to capsize and killing 11 officers and 308 men on board. As the 11 DF and 2 LCS broke contact with the 4 SG, the 4 DF approached the German battle fleet around 11:15. The Tipperary challenge signaled, but was quickly illuminated by Westfalen's searchlight, causing it to fire 92 5-point-inch and 45 3.5-inch rounds from 2,000 yards. The initial salvo likely killed Captain Charles Winter, igniting fires in Tipperary's forward coal bunker and damaging her engine room. The Nassau and Rhineland joined the Westfalen in firing at Tipperary, while the Spitfire and Sparrowhawk were also illuminated and engaged. The British launched torpedoes from the Tipperary, Spitfire, Sparrowhawk, Garland, Contest and Broke, while trying to evade gunfire. In the chaos, the Posen accidentally rammed Elbing, suffering heavy damage. The S-32 took 2 hits that disabled her engines, while the Rostock was crippled by a torpedo, and was later scuttled on June 1st. During the engagement, the Nassau attempted to ram the Spitfire, resulting in a collision that allowed the Spitfire to escape with 20 feet of armor plating on her deck. At 1:45, the crew of the Tipperary was forced to abandon ship as she sank bow first. At 11:40, the Broke challenge signaled a large ship, but was met with gunfire from the Westfalen and the Rhineland, sustaining damage before colliding with the Sparrowhawk. The Contest then struck the Sparrowhawk's stern, causing her to ultimately be scuttled by the marksman the next day at 8:45. At noon, the Garland, Ambuscade, Porpoise and Fortune encountered the Stuttgart, Hamburg and Westfalen, receiving illumination and gunfire. the Fortune was set ablaze, while the Porpoise suffered damage but managed to escape. All British ships launched torpedoes, but none hit. Turning south, the Ardent ran into the German van, whereupon the Westfalen reduced her to a burning wreck. With the Fortune and Ardent sunk, the remaining ships scattered, allowing the 4DF to disengage. After colliding with the Spitfire, the Nassau and Thüringen fired on the Black Prince, which failed to respond. The overwhelming gunfire resulted in the Black Prince exploding, killing all 857 crew members. 20 miles east, the 13DF, 9DF and 12DF attempted to intercept the HSF, but moved further east for a clearer view, clearing the way for the Germans. At 12:45, the Petard and the Turbulent encountered the German line and were spotted by the Westfalen, which fired on the Turbulent, disabling her boilers, while Petard escaped. At the same time, the Thüringen, V-71 and Regensburg shelled and torpedoed the Turbulent until she sank. Meanwhile, the 12DF sighted enemy battleships at 1:43 from 10 miles behind Jellicoe. The German ships hesitated to open fire, and the 12DF raced past as the Große Kurfürst, König and the Deutschland opened fire. The British launched 12 torpedoes around 2:05. 5 minutes later, the Pommern was hit twice, causing explosions that split her in two and killed all 844 crew members. At 01:45, the Lützow was torpedoed by the G-38 after her crew transferred to nearby destroyers. At 02:15, the V-4 had its bow blown off. Following this, the V-2 and V-6 rescued the crew and sank the wreck. Between 1:45 and 2:45, Wiesbaden sank with only one survivor rescued the next day. Meanwhile, 5 British destroyers from the 13DF launched a torpedo attack at 02:37, missing the Schleswig-Holstein, Schlesien, von der Tann and Döflingen. At 3:15, Zeppelins reported the BCF was 57 miles southwest of the HSF, prompting Scheer to order a return to port after learning the Lützow had been scuttled. At 5:20, the Ostfriesland struck a mine, but made it to port. The HSF reached the Jadar and Elbe between midday and 1:45 on June 1st, losing Lützow, Elbing and Rostock, but rescuing most of their crews. At 1:48, Jellicoe received a signal that Lützow was 40 miles north of Iron Duke, leading him to believe Scheer was following south, prompting him to turn north by 2:15. However, at 3:29, Jellicoe's hopes of catching Scheer were lost, when an urgent Admiralty signal came in, placing the HSF 16 miles from Horn's Reef, then some 29 miles away from Jellicoe. To his horror, he now realized Scheer had not taken the southern route. He had been duped. Even if he increased uniform speed to 19 knots, he would only reach their vicinity at 600. Thus, Jellicoe assumed a northern course to hunt down crippled enemy ships trying to escape. In total, the German fleet of 99 vessels had sunk 117 tons of British shipping, while the British fleet of 151 vessels sank 63,000 tons of German shipping. Casualty figures show the Germans suffered 2,551 deaths and 507 wounded, while the British suffered 6,094 deaths, 674 wounded, and 177 captured. The losses for the Germans included 1 battlecruiser, 1 pre-dreadnought, 4 light cruisers, and 5 torpedo boats. At the same time, the British lost 3 battlecruisers, 3 armoured cruisers, and 8 destroyers. Following the battle, reports revealed that the British faced numerous issues. Their armour-piercing shells often exploded prematurely due to using lyddite as the explosive filler, a known problem since 1916. Although Jellicoe ordered experiments with TNT to replace lyddite, new AP shells only arrived in April 1918. The British battlecruisers were designed for chasing lesser warships, rather than engaging battleships, unlike the Germans, who had improved their warship protection after learning from previous encounters. Beatty acknowledged that magazine vulnerability was a primary reason for British losses, with 3 battlecruisers destroyed when penetrating shells detonated their magazines. The British emphasized rate of fire over safety, improperly storing shells and cordite, and increasing vulnerability to catastrophic chain reactions. In terms of gunnery, the Germans employed a ladder system of firing initial volleys of 3 shots at different ranges, allowing for quicker range finding compared to the British bracket system, which corrected progressively based on best guess ranges. After Jutland, the British adopted the ladder system for better accuracy. Signalling proved disastrous for the British, who preferred using ship-to-ship flags and lamp signals and avoided wireless, which the Germans favoured. British flags and lamps proved unwieldy for large fleet actions, drew enemy fire at night, and were easily exploitable by the enemy. Likewise, the mishandling of Room 40 intelligence from the Admiralty to Jellicoe proved a catastrophic failure. Jellicoe was criticised for being overly cautious and allowing Scheer to escape. These criticisms primarily emerged from his decision at 7:15 to turn away from the German torpedo attack. However, turning towards the enemy would have risked the entire battle. Likewise, many criticised Beatty for mismanaging the initial encounter. Beatty had not properly provided Jellicoe with periodic information on the HSF's position, course and speed. Beatty had also allowed 4 fast battleships, the most powerful in the world, to engage 6 battleships, when better coordination would have set him up with 10 ships against Hipper's 5. Despite possessing superior range, Beatty had also withheld fire for 10 minutes and closed in on the Germans. Lastly, most of the losses suffered were from Beatty's force. The German HSF's strategy had been to whittle down the numerically superior enemy, and they had succeeded, inflicting greater losses on the British GF than it in turn had suffered. The Germans declared a great victory from the offset, as the British attempted to quell public outcry at their perceived loss. However, the Battle of Jutland had convinced Scheer that any further engagements would see the Imperial German Navy simply lose a war of attrition. Thus, the self-proclaimed German victory was Pyrrhic. Scheer no longer believed it was possible to whittle down the British, and thus the HSF abandoned its forays into the North Sea and focused on the Baltic, while switching back to unrestricted submarine warfare. At the end of the battle, Britain maintained their numerical superiority, with 23 dreadnoughts and 4 battlecruisers fully operational against 10 German dreadnoughts. A month after the battle, the GF was replenished with new ships and emerged stronger than before. At the strategic level, Britain had won, as the naval blockade remained, reducing Germany's vital imports by 55%, contributing to her losing World War I. More videos on the naval battles of the 20th century are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our patrons and YouTube members can watch more than 200 exclusive videos. Join their ranks via the link in the description or by pressing the join button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.